Now, the Daily Telegraph, the Sydney daily newspaper, ran its annual Bush Summit today at Griffith in the Murrumbidgee irrigation area. Terrific event. They pulled together a great task, a great team of people to discuss challenges and solutions for regional Australia. Even the Prime Minister turned up, and he had a bit to say about flood recovery, labour shortages and, of course, climate change.
As you grapple with climate change and the intensifying cycles of flood, fire and drought, you deserve nothing less than a government that has your back. In that spirit, I announced today that the government will deliver $75 million post-disaster resilience to areas across New South Wales devastated by the February-March floods.
Kind of strange, really, isn't it? Because he says his climate policies are going to stop natural disasters, but they have it both ways, eh? Sussan Ley is the Deputy Liberal Leader. Her electorate actually covers Griffith as well, and I spoke with her earlier from the summit, asking if labour shortages are the top of the list of rural issues.
Top of the list, you have to go everywhere in regional Australia and you will see that the number one issue for employers is workers. Where are they coming from? Why can't they fill vacancies? How quickly are we going to, as a government, bust the visa congestion pipeline so that it's not something that gets talked about next year, next season, but right now? Unemployment in this area, Chris, is 2.9%, and indeed all of regional Australia. So that tells you how serious the workforce shortages are.
Yeah, there's all sorts of jobs going begging. You can tell us about some of those in a moment. But the thing that frustrates me is that the Prime Minister's holding a job summit, a national job summit next week. You've got to wait for that sort of theatre, whereas it's actually quite obvious a couple of things that need to happen and probably will be announced out of that job summit. As you say, one is to do with visas and immigration, getting more workers from overseas into the country, and the other is freeing up retirees, pensioners, to do more work, not just in the cities, but of course right around the country.
That's our doubling of the veteran and pensions workforce bonus, and it would bring workers out of their homes and onto the shop floor, in hospitality, in aged care, and what's more, it would do it straight away. We don't want to financially punish pensioners who would like to do a little bit more work, earn a bit more cash, spend it in their community and help desperate businesses who are just looking for a hand right now. And Chris, this job summit is a complete waste of time. It genuinely will be a talk fest. Whatever gets announced after it has already been worked through. It's already gone through the Expenditure Review Committee of Cabinet. Everybody knows what it will be. So that's not good enough. It's not good enough for the people that are actually looking for those actions from the government. What's going to happen in my business? What's going to, change in my working environment so that I can actually make use of some initiatives? And waiting for this white paper nonsense that will take 12 months as well is just really quite ridiculous.
And what about getting more workers in from overseas, both temporary and permanent? What sort of areas in the bush, in the regions, are really desperate for labour at the moment?
There's a whole range of jobs, and people often think that jobs in regional Australia are jobs in orchards or picking fruit. And while they're certainly there are skilled and semi-skilled jobs: welding, manufacturing, sheet metal work. We value add so much of the agricultural produce that is grown here, and that creates a huge range of jobs, again, that are waiting to be filled. And it's not that far away from harvest. It'll start end of October. You can see the canola is already yellow in the paddocks around here. That tells me that farmers are gearing up for the next harvest, and they'll be looking for more workforce as well. So you've got to get that balance right between those we train here. That's something the government hasn't addressed very well. Meanwhile, the unions are calling the shots when it comes to bringing workers from overseas by saying, well, yes, but only under the list of conditions that we, the unions, are giving you, the government. So who's calling the shots there?
Yeah, exactly. The unions are going to have a big sway over this issue with labour, which is a problem. It'll slow things down. Tell us about the cost of living impacts in the city. Of course, we've seen off the days of $10 lettuces, I think, but obviously some of the impacts in the bush are being reflected in our supermarket shelves. What are the answers there?
Cost of living affects people in regional areas even more than it does in the city, because everything that you buy has to come from further away. And while we do grow the produce here, and I'm a great promoter of local farmers markets, the distribution supply chain involves a lot of time in a truck and a lot of time on the road. And with the cost of fuel, that time is increasing, so the cost is increasing. And if you look at what our farmers do, their input costs are fuel, are fertiliser, are of course labour, and they're going up as well. And so right along the supply chain for fresh produce, for manufactured food, you've got cost increases and inflation. So I've heard Mr Albanese talk about lots of things. I haven't actually heard him talk about one single initiative that will address this cost price squeeze that we, talking to businesses and everyday Australians, we can see is starting to bite.
Well, this is the trouble. There is a lot of talk, but as you say, not much action. And what worries me, especially when it comes to the cost of living, the cost of transport, the cost of all sorts of inputs, is electricity and energy. And what Anthony Albanese is promising to do by doubling down on his renewables push, surely that's just going to increase power costs across the country. And so far, there's no sign it's delivering the so-called green jobs bonanza in the regions.
Because it's just a magic pudding. It's so easy to talk about the proportion of renewable electricity you're going to have in the grid. It's quite easy to try and walk, well, it shouldn't be easy for him to walk away from his $275 cut to household and small business electricity bills. He certainly walked away from that. But, I mean, you take the Jobs Summit. The Dealers and Motor Trade Association didn't get an invitation. Tesla did. And there are 20 million cars that run on the internal combustion in Australia today. And these are workers and trades that keep people safe on the roads. And we value what they do out here in regional Australia, because we know we're not going to have electric vehicles tomorrow. And no one in the world is making an electric ute, by the way. And even if they were, it would be unaffordable. So you've got this whole sector that is just completely being overlooked. And that's just one group that hasn't been invited to the Job Summit, which indicates that Mr Albanese's priorities are not real and not grounded in what Australian businesses need.
Well, indeed, the Prime Minister said there this morning that we need to make more things in this country, that we need to be more self-sufficient, that this is the lesson of the pandemic. A lot of people knew this before the pandemic, of course, but it is true. We would like to make more things in this country, but the more unreliable and expensive you make our energy system, the more you push off manufacturing and other jobs offshore.
That's exactly right. And it's just such an easy thing to say, isn't it? We want to make more things in Australia. You get the head nod in the room, you get the feel good, but what actually do you do? And when you consider the cost of energy, I visited a foundry in South Australia that makes the castings for the Adelaide to Darwin Railway, and it's just simply going to be unaffordable for them to continue to do what they do. So we're looking down the barrel of sovereign manufacturing capabilities that are soon going to desert this country if there's not a focus on what we should be doing here.
So much of it comes down to affordable, reliable energy too, and I think that's an issue that both sides of politics and state and federal are still grappling with. Thanks so much for your time, Sussan Ley. I appreciate it.
Pleasure, Chris. Anytime.